Hello, everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. I am Jordan Hall, and I am pumped to be joined by Joe Fordyce, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer. Joe, last podcast, we looked at 3 Flyers due for promotions. Today, we're going to follow it up with 3 Flyers that could be due for demotions. But before we get into those 3, our takes on that, Flyers are picking at number 7 in the June draft. They did not slide. They did not climb up. What did you think of the NHL draft lottery and the Flyers staying put?
Well, as it unfolded, the lower picks, and I mean, it just was chalk. Each pick was chalk, and obviously it was chalk right up until the top 3, which I think the broadcast kind of messed up and revealed that Columbus had fallen to the 3rd pick before they were supposed to. But I wasn't surprised. I mean, even the conspiracy theorists out there that said, they're going to fix the draft to get Bedard in a big market. They didn't have to do that much work to get to Chicago. So if your theory is the conspiracy theorists are not going to let the generational talent like McDavid is in Edmonton, so they're going to make sure this generational talent is in a big hockey market. They accomplished that, and they didn't have to. Like, there's nobody giving any theories that this was a conspiracy because he went to Chicago, because they only moved up. They were in the top 3 already. So, I was not expecting anything to happen like that. The Flyers caught lightning in a bottle in 2017 when they got the pick that ended up being Nolan Patrick. They caught lightning in the bottle. I'm merely referring to where they picked in the draft, obviously. And we know how that panned out. I highly doubt they'd be that lucky 2 times in a 6-year span to jump that 5 or more picks up in the draft. So not surprised at all by that. And this is supposed to be a deep draft. Everyone says it's a deep draft. And the Flyers have a lot of work to do. And I think this pick being a home run combined with, some of their guys taking leaps and, future drafts, finding guys, diamonds in the rough in the later rounds of the draft. Those are the things that whoever this new hockey operations staff, whoever that's comprised of, that's what they have ahead of them. I think it's more than one. It's more than one player's worth. Now you could say Connor Bedard is putting your franchise more than one player ahead just by himself. And we've seen that with Connor McDavid. But let's remember, it's not like Connor McDavid's played in a bunch of different Stanley Cup finals at this point in his career. Could be headed there this year. But, you see that team, just using it as an example, a team that got that generational talent, they give up a ton of goals every game. Connor McDavid's not helping that. He's helping outscore that, but he's not helping prevent that from happening. And when's the last time we saw a Stanley Cup champion giving up 4, 5, 6 goals a game? It really doesn't happen generally. And then the other generational talent from that McDavid draft was Jack Eichel, and he's with Vegas now, not even with Buffalo, who picked him originally at number 2. So, there was a lot of hoopla, most of it around Connor Bedard, but mixing up the Connors, most of it around Connor Bedard. But, I wasn't expecting them to jump to number 1. And regardless, this staff has a lot of work to do, and they need to find draft picks, free agents, and create some cap space. So those are not, the to-do list is pretty long for this offseason. And hitting this number 7 pick would be at the top of the list.
The overwhelming focus for me, I think, should be that the Flyers can get a good player at 7. And we've seen good players be drafted at 7. Most recently, Quinn Hughes, Dylan Cousins. Further in the past, Mark Scheifele, Ivan Provorov obviously was the 7th overall pick. Jacob Voracek, Matt Dumba. Good players can be selected at number 7. And the Flyers need to focus on making sure they're hitting on these picks.
And think about the name. Just to pick one of the names you just mentioned out of the Mark Scheifele. He's been the captain of the Winnipeg Jets for a long time now. If they could get a Mark Scheifele, every fan, every front office person, everybody involved with the Flyers would sign up for that right now. Now, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but I mean, Scheifele has been the centerpiece of that team for I actually shouldn't say he was the captain the whole time, because Blake Wheeler was the captain for a while, but Scheifele's been a integral part of that team. And we saw a couple of years ago when he got hurt in the playoffs, their whole team dynamic changed. So that player was taken at number 7. If the Flyers could get something anywhere close to that at number 7, they would sign up for it right now.
And when the Flyers, when you're a team like them and rebuilding and putting an emphasis on youth, and that's the thing that's going to push it forward. You get high-end talent in the draft, you can get it in the top 10. It doesn't have to be the top 1-2 players. Don't get me wrong, Connor Bedard is a generational type of talent. Adam Fantilli is really good. But you can get good players in that 7 to 10 range, and the Flyers really need to focus on drafting and developing, hitting on players like Cutter Gauthier at 5, and the potential pick here at number 7, making sure you're hitting on those players, getting them in your system, and building around it.
Yeah, and the NHL draft is not covered like the NFL draft and most years the NBA draft, where, you know, your average fan knows, 20 to 30 players that are going to be picked in both of those drafts. The NHL draft isn't like that. You usually hear 1 or 2 names. 2, the Connor McDavid year, you heard McDavid and Eichel. Those were the years. Even going back to the Nolan Patrick draft, the names you heard about, Nico Hischier and Nolan Patrick, they were the top 2 picks. I don't remember people talking about Miro Heiskanen before that draft.
Yeah.
I remember a little bit about Cale Makar. Elias Pettersson, I don't remember a ton of buzz about him being a generational talent. And those guys, at least speaking of Makar, is a generational talent. Pettersson's pretty close, I think. So it's not like if you get beyond the guys that people are talking about, that those players can't be generational players. They certainly can.
Yeah, exactly. And that should be the overwhelming, I think, theme here, is that the Flyers need to draft and develop no matter where they're picking. It's not just about getting the top overall pick or top 2 pick. Make sure you hit on those first-round picks and continue to stockpile talent as best you can and try to push it forward. But, Joe, we are live at Rivers Casino, Philadelphia, and we're excited to get into this second aspect of our theme that we were doing of demotions and promotions. We looked at 3 Flyers due for a promotion next season on the previous podcast. We're going to get into demotions today. So let's start from 3 to 1. Your third player, Joe, that could be in line for a demotion.
So I'm going to go with, and listen, I like his attitude on the ice. I like the way he plays hard all the time, but the game needs to be reined in a little bit. And I'm going to say Wade Allison, because I wondered, the guy that came up late in the season 2 years ago that was scoring goals, he was around the net. He seemed to have a nose for where to be to get in goal scoring areas. I don't think the player we saw this season in Wade Allison resembled that player. And I kind of was puzzled as to why, because he skates hard, he plays hard, he can play a physical game while also getting into the goal scoring areas. Wade Allison's trouble wasn't anything to do with the actual game of hockey aside from him staying healthy. And then this season, he remained relatively healthy, but it just felt like I don't know. And it seemed like he was lost on the ice a lot of times. And I felt like watching him, he put himself into bad spots that could result in injury. For example, carrying the puck into the zone with a full head of steam, but then going to backward skating into the offensive zone corner and just passing the puck and then leaving yourself wide open to get destroyed against the boards. Like those are kind of things where it's almost like a pickup game, and he showed up and he had never played with some of the guys on the ice before. And that's not the case. And I kind of wondered why that happened. So I think, assuming he remains healthy this offseason and gels with this team, if he's part of John Tortorella's plan, and I think Allison was one of those guys where we didn't Tortorella didn't talk about him really enough for us to get a read on exactly how he felt about this guy. There were certain guys we knew he loves that guy. He might not be super fond of that guy's game. He didn't bench Wade Allison in an obvious way where he was, and I know Wade was in and out of the lineup a little bit, but he didn't bench him like in the middle of a game or sort of make an example out of him or anything like that. So I definitely think he needs to refine his game and refine it to use the skill set that he has, because the word I would use to describe his game last season would be random. Because I never felt like I almost felt like he was playing catch up to be in the right spots on the ice, particularly when he didn't have the puck. And that's not going to get you a lot of ice time from John Tortorella. We didn't hear him specifically criticize him much for that, but it just in watching him play, random would be the way I would describe his game. And I wonder what his role will be going forward.
That's a really good one. I actually have him as well. I actually have him one spot up, so we'll get into him a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I do have him there, Joe, and I think you do too, is that also they're going to have potentially two forwards coming back, and Cam Atkinson, Sean Couturier. And then you have some kids knocking on the door like Tyson Forster, Elliot Desnoyers. So there's going to be competition. And John Tortorella had mentioned how Wade Allison's hurt a lot and doesn't always play the style that they want him to play. There's one thing to be max effort, all out hustle, which Wade Allison is, and you really commend him for playing that way. But there's a way to do it in a smart fashion where you're effective and not out of position, and then also staying healthy. I thought it was a real positive that Wade Allison played 60 games this year. It's the first time he's really got a full crack at a pro season. And
yeah, like I said, I mean, that was what we were worried about with him. This other stuff we're talking about now is not anything that was even part of the equation before this season. And I think we both recognize, obviously, by talking about this, we recognize the same things with him about the random positions on the ice and sort of being out of position. And, there are a few things that are above being out of position that are going to get your ice time cut in the NHL. But that's certainly one of them.
Yeah, and I think you saw a number of younger players sort of solidify roles or at least win a lot longer of a leash with John Tortorella. The Noah Cateses, the Morgan Frosts, the Owen Tippett's. This is speaking of the forward position group. Wade Allison, I feel like just very much in the middle. Like they saw some things, but they didn't see enough, and they don't really have a long-term commitment to him just right now. He's got one more year left on his deal for cheap. He's a 25-year-old, so he's not ridiculously young. He's not old. I think he's very much in the figure it out type of phase with the Flyers. He's still figuring out who he is, but I mean, he's got all the makings of being a real effective bottom sixer. Like he's got probably top 6 offensive upside, but he's got like a bottom 6 engine. 9 goals in those 60 games, which is not bad. If you give him 10 more games, he's in double-digit goal range. But the Flyers are going to have some more competition. They're potentially you're going to have 2 established players back in the lineup up front, and they like kids like Tyson Forster and Elliot Desnoyers. So, yeah, Joe, I agree. I had Wade Allison at number 2. He's a guy that I think could really be in a fight for playing time and for his role. Very much needs to, I think, open some eyes a little bit more next year to solidify himself being a part of the future. I don't think the Flyers don't believe he can be a part of it, but I don't think they're convinced yet that he is too.
No, and this coach is not, you don't have to figure out. There's not a lot of mysteries with how he feels about certain players. And I feel like the ones that he didn't talk about that much are in that figure it out territory.
Yeah.
And clearly Wade Allison, I think, is right in there. So who's your number 3?
Yeah, so I had
number 2.
I had Tanner Laczynski, and it's a guy that's very similar to Wade Allison in terms of where they are right now at the organization. Also a guy that's 25. I believe he turns 26 on June 1st. So he's not very young. He's a 4-year college kid. And he admitted he said at the end of his season press conference, he said, I had a crap year. He missed almost 3 months because of a lower body injury. Just didn't look like the same guy when he got back towards the end of the season. And John Tortorella was very honest about Tanner Laczynski. He said he heard a lot about Laczynski and that he can be a fourth-line center type, third-line center type, but he said he never saw it from him. So Laczynski was very accountable at the end of the season, said he just didn't feel like he had a good year, said it should be fire for him going into the offseason. But I think just because of where he is, he's got one more year left on his deal. He's battled injuries. I don't think he's won over anyone yet in the Flyers organization. And similar to Allison, he's going to be up against competition. The Flyers they want to have kids pushing everywhere. And they're going to have some vets potentially back in the lineup too, in guys that we mentioned, Atkinson, Couturier. So Tanner Laczynski, to me, is my number 30 for potentially seeing a demotion, potentially maybe not being in the opening night lineup, potentially, fighting for playing time. He was in the opening night lineup this year. Then unfortunately injuries just really set him back, and he just really didn't make the impression I think he wanted to. So he's at number 3 for me.
Yeah, I think Tanner Laczynski is in danger of falling into that territory of the guy you always hear his name, but you never see pan out on the ice. And we see it all across all of sports. The Phillies were known for it for a good portion of the 80s and 90s. You always would hear these kind of overinflated descriptions of their prospects, and then you would never see it, or you would wonder why the person wasn't up in the major leagues. And I think, injuries aside, those are the things we wonder about Tanner Laczynski. And I feel like John Tortorella tried to give him a vote of confidence by pumping him up a little bit, talking about him to the media early in the season. And you just, we never saw it.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's not, forward is not the position on this team to be like half in, half out, because like you said, there's 2 key pieces coming back, and that's independent of anything they do free agency wise.
And I like Tanner Laczynski, good guy, good kid. I think he works hard, and he's got some elements to his game that I really think could be valuable in an NHL lineup, but he just didn't show it this year, and he wasn't able to stay healthy. And he's a guy that's battled injuries too. He's had a ton of hip problems. And when you're a 4-year college player, you just don't get as long of a leash. There's not as much patience, because when you get to the NHL, you're around 24, 25. You're not, a teenager or in your early 20s. So these guys are expected to produce a little quicker. So similar to Allison, Laczynski, I think is going to be in a fight to prove himself and prove that he can be an everyday NHLer. Flyers Talk is brought to you by Great Railing. Stop into Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices on all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. Joe, number 2, guy that could be in line for demotion. Who is it?
So I'm going to say Felix Sandstrom here, because, and the obvious is the elephant in the room is that the coach loves Sam Ersson.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have Sam Ersson as your backup, you probably need to explore trading him, because to me, Sandstrom didn't do enough to say I'm a solid backup NHL goaltender. And Ersson did, quite frankly. Ersson at times looked like a starting goaltender for stretches. And I think I've brought this up on this podcast before. I think we've talked about it. The way Ersson's NHL tenure started, with getting pulled, then having to go back in because Carter Hart got hurt in that game, that would be enough to ruin a lot of guys' careers. And all he did was take it and run with it for a 5-6 game stretch there, where he looked like a starting goaltender in this league, to the point where people were joking around about whether there would be a goalie controversy. So to me, Felix Sandstrom all of a sudden looks like a guy without a role on this team. Yeah. Now, is his role to go back to the minors? I don't know. It's a little tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube when he was with the big club all season.
Yeah.
I would say it's maybe a little tough to do that without letting him explore other NHL opportunities, because you look around the league and you see people like Alex Lyon playing in playoff series. And this was a guy that, outside of a few opportunities, never really got an opportunity here. So to me, if you're Felix Sandstrom and you see that, you want a new start somewhere else. You don't want to go play in the minors, not after spending a whole year with the big club. So to me, Sandstrom is a guy that's definitely in line for a demotion. And we talked about it with the forward position. This is a position where at least for the backup spot, there's push from the guy in the minors, and the coach loves him, which leads Sandstrom as the odd man out. So I'm going to say him as number 2.
The way John Tortorella talked about Samuel Ersson, it felt like Ersson had leapfrogged him on the organizational depth chart, Felix Sandstrom, without really playing the NHL games and getting more work, because they were so focused on Ersson getting time down with the Phantoms. But John Tortorella is going to have a lot to say. His voice is going to be heard.
And we also know now that in the NHL, I mean, the backup goaltender might play 30 games.
Yeah.
It's not like, the backup's going to play 10 games or 5 games. We see it. We've seen it since Carter Hart's career started. Now Carter might want to play every game, but they don't play him every game. They need a backup goaltender they can count on. Brian Elliott was that for a little while. And I think Samuel Ersson has done enough already to show you that he's at least the front runner for that position. So yeah, I think Sandstrom is the odd man out there with that situation.
Yeah, it's tough to see where his pro career is going to go. I believe he's got one more year left on his deal, so he's under team control. But yeah, will he spend more time in the minors? Will he eventually maybe head back overseas and play? He's Swedish, so maybe eventually he'll return to the SHL and play over there. Who knows? I don't want to judge him or judge where his career path is going to go, but it really does feel like Samuel Ersson has surpassed him, especially in the eyes of the head coach. And we all know John Tortorella is going to have a lot to say in player personnel. His voice is going to be heard. That's a fact. Yeah, Joe, I had Wade Allison at number 2. We talked a lot about him. A guy that is really going to have to prove himself in year 2 under John Tortorella. I think there's things that they like about him, but they really want to see more and see it consistently and see if he can. I think the goal for Wade Allison will, 1, keep his role, stay in the lineup, and play more games. 60's not bad, but try to get up in the 70 range.
Right. And we heard John Tortorella reference that he's always banged up.
Yeah.
That's not what you want to hear about yourself from your head coach. Yeah. And when he's saying banged up, he's not talking about injured. He's talking about little nicks here and there. And that potentially could keep him out of the lineup. Yeah. So you need to be available. And some of the stuff I talked about earlier with putting himself in vulnerable spots, head down in the middle of the ice, leaving yourself wide open along the boards to get crushed after giving up the puck. These are the kind of things that you need to tighten up so that you are available more and you're not nursing some sort of nagging issue after every game. Yeah. And quite frankly, I mean, Wade Allison was on the ground a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes on a breakaway, gets a shot, ends up on the ground, or there's a reckless nature that on one respect you can respect that sort of play, yeah. But on the other hand, it needs to be if you plan on playing a long time in this league, you can't play that way. Yeah. You just can't do it. You're not going to last. And the falling down and the being out of position, those things kind of go hand in hand because you fall down, particularly after like a breakaway or an offensive opportunity that you don't score on, that can go the other way quickly. Yeah. And if you're down behind the net, then that's a one man less on the other end. And that's the kind of stuff that we saw way too much of. And that's what has to be cleaned up with his game.
Yeah. With the Flyers, if we're talking about guys that we don't know like exactly where their role is, that tells you like that's why they probably could be in line for demotion. It's tough to tell where they fit. I think the Flyers worked a lot with Allison in how to play his style, not take away what he does well, but also hone it, tweak it, and make sure he's being effective. Because you're right, if you play that style, you take yourself out of the play, it leads to goals against.
I'm just trying to figure out what the difference is with his game under AV as opposed to Torts. I can't figure it out, but it does seem like he wasn't around the net as much with Torts as he was with AV.
Yeah,
that first year when he came up, I mean, he was always around the net,
yeah.
Getting rebounds, getting those, the cliche, the dirty goals,
yeah.
Going to the goal scoring areas. I didn't notice him doing that this year.
Sure. And I will say when he first came up, like he was one of the more exciting prospects they wanted to look at, and he got opportunity. He got power play. He got more minutes. This year, I think he was tasked with being more of a bottom sixer and playing in smaller minutes and being effective that way. I think it was definitely a learning year for him. Very interested to see what kind of player he can be next year, what kind of role he'll have, and what kind of competition he'll have too. Because as you mentioned, Joe, we're not even counting for maybe potential signings. I mean, potentially they, as John Tortorella said, backfill. Potentially they get, a role player in free agency up front where they backfill, and again, a role is potentially up for grabs. Catch all the sports action and more at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Whether it's the money line or the pass line, there's something for everyone, including a great sports book. Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Philly loves a winner. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Joe, I'm very interested and intrigued to hear who you have. Number one.
I think we're both going to have the same one. I'm going to say Kevin Hayes.
Okay, I have something different, but
okay.
I'm excited.
Well, that's interesting. So Kevin Hayes, to me, here's the thing. I don't think he's going to be here next year. I think they're going to find a suitor that might cost them something. That might cost them one of these forwards that we're talking about going somewhere else to entice a team to bring Kevin Hayes' contract on. I don't see how he could have a role in this team this year. We all know him and the coach didn't see eye to eye much of the season. And there were just times where he just looked out of the fire that he showed when he came here. I didn't see that at all last year. And I think those are the kind of things happen when you don't see eye to eye with the head coach. And I can't see a crucial role on this team with him going forward. I can't see it. So he's going to be my number one because I think if you combine his game, his clashing with the coach and his salary, I think a move and a start somewhere else is what would be best for the player and the team with Kevin Hayes.
I felt like John Tortorella really put the writing on the wall with Kevin Hayes.
But here's the thing, though. It's not like you can just go, okay, let's get rid of him. I mean, he's got term and money on his deal. So it's not like teams are lining up to take on term and money. And especially it's not like for the salary he's making, there are guys scoring twice the amount of goals in this league. So you start adding those things up. That's what I mean. Yeah. You might have to give up a piece to get it to go with Hayes. And I don't think it's just going to be as easy as, okay, we have to move on.
No, I think they will have to retain some salary and potentially spice up the offer not because Kevin Hayes is a bad player. I think other teams will absolutely value him given where his age is and what he did this year in terms of production. But his deal comes with term and with bigger dollars. So my gut tells me Kevin Hayes will not be here next year with the Flyers. That's I don't think the Flyers are going to be in an absolute rush to get him out. I don't think they're going to have to think let's give him up for nothing. So it wouldn't terribly surprise me if Kevin Hayes is back, but very much I think Kevin Hayes admitted to us that he saw the message the Flyers were sending and where the Flyers are, and they really want to get younger and they want to rebuild and they want to clear some spots. And Kevin Hayes turned 31, I believe, last week. Or earlier this week. So he's 31 and he's got some term and maybe doesn't fit in a rebuilding type of picture. So that's a good one, Joe. Yeah, very much in line for a demotion. I would even think if he was here, he maybe wouldn't see the minutes and the situations he got earlier in the year. He saw a dip this past season. Yeah. With his minutes, spot.
We saw him playing bottom six a lot.
Right.
Playing at the end of the season.
So. Which really put the writing on the wall that doesn't look like Tortorella really believes he's a part of this moving forward. I have Ivan Provorov, Joe. It's a guy that I think has a better chance of still being here, but I just don't know what kind of role he's going to have. If he's not moved in the offseason, it's just really tough to get a read on how the Flyers still feel about him, how John Tortorella feels about him. He played the second fewest minutes per game of his career. The only time he played fewer minutes was his rookie year. I believe it 7 years ago. So like the Flyers want to get younger on defense. They have a kid like Cam York who wants that they want to play power play and play a lot of minutes. Ristolainen earned power play time last year or this past season.
And we've talked about Ristolainen on the other part of this podcast with the promotion. And one thing's for sure, Risto's minutes are not going to go down. They're only going to go up because of the way he played. And I think he solidified himself as a second pair defenseman. He's played his best when he's with Sanheim.
Yeah.
So if Sanheim and him are the second pair, where does that leave Provorov? Again, another question. Like you said, there's a lot of questions with Provorov's game. And this is another guy we saw not seeing eye to eye with the coach at different times this season.
Yep, exactly. And Cam York's also a lefty shot, just like Provorov. So they're very similar. And I think obviously the organization wants to start to build around Cam York and have him play every day, play in all situations. And I really think they're still committed to Sanheim being a big part of this. I mean, he's just next year starting a new 8-year deal. And
they kind of don't have much of a choice.
Right, exactly. And Tortorella had mentioned that they believe they can get it right with him. So I think Sanheim could maybe take on more responsibility in terms of bigger minutes and maybe some power play time to get his confidence going. So I just think the Flyers want to get younger at that position. And I think they have guys that are just kind of starting new deals or young players that are ready to take bigger chunks of the pie. Just makes me really wonder where Ivan Provorov stands. Is he still going to be a Flyer next year? I think is a question. And just kind of what role he plays. I think Provorov was pretty frustrated at times with the role he was playing. I think he wanted more minutes. I think he would have loved to play on the power play more. They didn't really give it to him all the time. I think they wanted to see more out of him. I think they wanted more balance on their day. So Provorov, to me, is the number one where I could see him maybe being demoted or potentially not being here too. It's just one of the biggest question marks I think there is this offseason.
Yeah, I would say the biggest issue with Provorov that leads to that frustration you referred to there is that the Flyers and John Tortorella's vision of what Provorov is significantly different than what Ivan Provorov's vision of himself is.
Yeah.
He views himself as A, and they view him as B or C. And A, B, and C are not that close in this scenario. So I think that is what has led to the frustration. So again, I don't think it's as much as the Kevin Hayes scenario with the not seeing eye to eye, but I can totally see because John Tortorella did go out of his way near the end of the season to praise the play of Provorov. I don't feel like he did that with Hayes.
Yeah, that's why I have Ivan Provorov, because I do think there's a decent chance he's back here and they want to work with him. He's younger than Kevin Hayes, doesn't make as much. He's a defenseman, so he plays, more minutes. So I don't think there's more gray area with Provorov, whereas I think with Kevin Hayes, even Kevin admitted that he got the message. I think there's a very good chance they will part ways. Where with Provorov, not exactly sure. Ton of gray area there with him, which could have him in line for demotion. I wonder too if his situation just screams somewhere else for a fresh start.
Mm-hmm.
That whole new scenery thing. I almost think maybe both sides are debating that too. Of is this a classic case of new scenery? He needs to go somewhere else for a fresh start, and the Flyers maybe need to move on finally. And he's got value. I mean, if the Flyers do go the trade route with him, he's got a ton of value still. So we'll see where it all goes. But the Flyers have so many moving parts, so many, I think, jobs to win. Like, I'm not sure if I really recall a training camp where there's roles and responsibilities up for grabs. Last year, there was a ton because it was a new coach. I still think that's the case, Joe. And we still have the offseason to go to figure out who's going to be here, who won't.
And that includes in the front office.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they still need to hire a president of hockey operations. It's early. It's still May. The entry test not until late June. But that still needs to be figured out. So ton of stuff to figure out upstairs before there's even decisions to be made downstairs. But we'll have it all covered here on the Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Joe Fordyce, thank you so much for joining me. Great seeing you. Great chatting with you. Big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer over here to my left, for always being flexible with our time. And Flyers fans, of course, as always, thank you for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Wherever you get your podcasts, please rate and listen. And we can't wait to talk to you next time.